All right, and we are live. All right, hey, good evening, LinkedIn. Dave Wilson, Ring of Hire Show. Hey, it's Sunday night, right? Everybody's ready to go to work on Monday. Listen, I have one of the great guests that I enjoy having, Mr. Paul Falcone, on here tonight. He's meant a lot to me with his new books and everything that he's done, and we're going to talk tonight. I like this one. The First-Time Manager is Leading Through Crisis. So how you doing, Paul?
Good, Dave. I'm doing fine. It's great to be here again.
Good. We're going to be right back, and we're going to talk right after this video. There we go. All right, what do you think of it?
That's the coolest opening I've ever seen. I love it.
I got it from the Fever app, that Fever app it is, and I saw the guy in Bangladesh, wherever he was from. He had it, and I was thinking, wow, what if I put every word of staffing and everything I know in my life right into that? And he came back with that, and we did it in one take, and oh my God, I loved it. It was awesome.
With the music, and as each one of those goes by, it's like, I've written about that. I've written about that. It's great. It's wonderful.
I can imagine. Hey, Paul, if you want to do me a favor, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about and what you do and all the books you've written. And this is his new one, everybody, Leading Through Crisis.
Yeah, Dave, thanks. So my career was 3 decades in the human resources ranks. So I was the chief human resources officer for Nickelodeon. I was the head of international human resources for Paramount Pictures. I also worked in healthcare and biotech and financial services. So my background was everything from union, nonprofit, Fortune 500, small startup. I mean, over the last 3 decades, I think in a lot of ways, my writing or my work informed my writing. I always knew that I wanted to touch as many different spaces as I could to make me a better writer. This book that just came out is my 16th book. And it came out on September the 5th, just a couple of weeks ago. And I have another book coming out in that same family, The First-Time Manager, and it'll be The First-Time Manager HR, which will be out in the spring of 2024. So I typically write about the employee life cycle, from effective hiring, workplace ethics, performance management, leadership development, terminations, layoffs, whatever you can do to motivate, engage your people. That's always been my space.
That's what it's there. We have a couple of people in here. James is in here. James Kunkel, he's got a great podcast too. Give him Michael Ray, One for the Money. Rob, he's from Pittsburgh. I know he enjoys watching the show. I wanted to tell everybody the reason I say about this first book, because I've done this before, Paul, is I told you that the one book you wrote, 75 Ways to Managers Hire, Develop, and Keep Effective People. The other one, Hiring, Firing. I left them at my office, so they're in there for reasons. But I got to go through a couple of them. I got them all. This one here, everybody, 101 Tough Conversations. That was outstanding. I mean, it brings reality. Look at this. We got 2,600 effective phrases for effective performance reviews. I use this. This is the best one that I use. I really tell people too, is the 96 great interview questions. What I like about this one, Paul, is I like how you put examples of why the question you ask and what you feel you should get out of it. I like how you give the multiple things on. That's my best thing, even from looking at somebody's body language. This one here, this is always my heaviest one. The 101 sample write-ups and performance reviews is great. And I did start the series. This is the series that you were talking about. There's 5, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Very good. Wow. No one has read my stuff more than you have, Dave. I am so impressed and very thankful.
I got them all. And the reason I've told you, Paul, that I've liked these books so much is I wish, I'll say it over and over, I wish I would have had these books in the 90s, because I only learned by going through everything. And I only had managers. We didn't know nobody knew how to do the stuff that you talk about in this book. Nobody did.
Yeah. The funny thing, Dave, thanks for saying that. The back of the book, it's funny. It says at the very top, it's every manager must be prepared to face critical situations that management training never warned them about.
Yep.
And that the publisher put that out there. And I said, boy, you hit it spot on. That's really what this book is about. I like to focus on the how. People know what to do. They just don't know how to do it, right? Oh, hold your people accountable or motivate your team. What do those conversations sound like? That's the question. And I think when you can help give people little scripts and things to make them feel comfortable, I don't say use the wording exactly like that. Make it your own. But once they can kind of get into it and they can kind of predict how the person is going to respond, they're more inclined to open that can of worms. And that's the goal. The opposite of that is look the other way, sweep it under the rug, and hopefully it'll fix itself. And it rarely does.
It does.
So this book was one of those things where it was like, look, they don't teach this in MBA school. They don't teach this in management training.
No.
But these are the things you've got to know, because we live in a crazy world right now. And everyone I know is kind of, I hate to say it, but burned out. We're building the plane while we're flying it. We're exhausted. And the change just doesn't stop. So it's constant disruption. And that's what I wanted to write a book on. So
how much
does you have it in your hand?
How much of your experience goes into this? Because you just can't make these up, because we're going to go over a lot of them tonight. And they're just ones that hit me because as simple as we'll talk about the one where the cursing and the language of everybody, right? You hear it all the time. And little things like that you put in here, it just gives that new manager an option. I love it, the great option to what he wants to say or how you want to say it. But how do you come up? Is it all within the experience? It's got to be.
Yeah, it is. I always say I'm not that creative. I could have never written all these books. When you're in human resources, the stories find you. And you're like, wait, they did what? But the funny thing is, for me, through the years, through the decades, actually, these things that would pop up would turn into articles. I'm a columnist for SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, for example. And it would turn into articles. And after a while, I've had so many articles that I'm like, you know what? There's enough content here for a book. And that's kind of how the circle just kept feeding itself. So
how it kept coming around. Rupert says, hello. Hi, David and Paul. And then Daryl's all the way in Texas. He's from Texas tonight, so he's in there. He always comes on the show.
Cool.
When I look at all these books that you've written, and especially this one here now, and we talked about it before, I know we say human resources and everything like that as a manager, but I believe sometimes a manager anymore is kind of like the HR, because if you don't know all these things, we get so tied up on these little, and when we go over these tonight, these little things that take up so much friggin' time. And I just wish sometimes that people would address them, because if you would address some of I'm going to get worked up on it, but if you address some of the issues, you're not going to have these problems.
Yeah, the way I've always written it is address the minor impediments before they become major obstacles.
Right.
But it's hard. The path of least resistance is avoidance, and people.
That's what I wanted. Yep, right there.
Right, and I get it. That is human nature. Yet at the same time, here's the thing that I like to tell people: always go to that 30,000 foot view and look at what's happening. I know we work and live in the weeds every day, but you've got to go bigger than that and see where are things going. And when you look at Gen Y millennials, the 45 and under crowd, and Gen Z Zoomers, the 25 and under crowd, these are the most studied generational cohorts in world history. We know everything about them. And survey after survey, they keep coming up with the top 5, and they keep coming up with the same things. And one of those top 5 elements is they want career and professional development. So what does that mean? It means they're looking for a boss to give them challenging work and help them learn their craft or their trade or their job, which means you have to give feedback. Looking the other way may seem like it's easy on the front end, but the reality is it's just going to create drama down the road. And so giving constructive feedback, what we learned in the second grade is still true. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. But knowing how to give that on-the-spot feedback in a constructive manner is really what growing talent is all about.
Do you see, Paul, the difference in Gen Z? We say years ago versus now, it's all the same problems. Is it, have you learned even more, experienced more now with the new generation versus say 20 years ago?
It's a good question, Dave. In a way, yeah. I mean, I was the end of the baby boom. I was born in 63. The baby boom ended in 64 with the
Right.
introduction of the birth control pill. I made it by that much. But the point is, when I think about what I wanted when I was in my 20s or 30s or 40s, yeah, it was kind of the same thing. I
Right.
wanted a company that was ethical. I wanted to work for a manager that cared about me personally. I was looking for some form of a work-life family balance or control or equilibrium, whatever you want to call it. They want corporate social responsibility and environmentalism. These are noble, right? And yeah, that's kind of what I wanted too. The difference is we've got unique challenges right now. The pace of
Right.
change, the technology, the globalization, is really, really much more intense. We also have, for the first time in history, we've got 5 generations in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so you have managers that are managing people that are their parents' age, and it's awkward. And
Right.
there's resentment from the older employees being managed by someone who is their child's age. There are different unique challenges, but every generation has them. It's just right now, it's like the snow globe. We put it all in a snow globe and we've shaken it and turned it upside down. And that's, I think, how most people are feeling, that they're treading water at best in their career. So we have to help them get ahead of that curve.
At their best. Daryl says 2023 workforce expectations are 50% of the workforce being gig, contract, and temp. WF expects over the next 4 years that 23% of the workforce will have to change, and 44% of their skills, etc., will be new. Wow, that's probably true.
Well, the reskilling piece is real because AI, and I don't say that to scare anyone, but this idea of artificial intelligence will remove initially a lot of the repetitive tasks. Then over time, it's going to get smarter and it's going to be able to kind of move up the chain. But they were afraid of the same thing as when automation and robots came onto the scene. And as it turns out, as we look back now over the last 20 years, we have more jobs now.
Right.
And they're richer in terms of what we expect from people. That trend will continue. It just doesn't happen at the same time. So employees may be displaced for a little while, but then they have to go back and they have to reskill. But here's the catch, in my opinion, Dave. There's a great book out there, if you ever want to read it. It's called The Next 100 Years. Okay. And it is by George Friedman. It was a New York Times bestseller. It was written in 2009, but it looks at the rest of the century. And one of the key factors in this book is talent scarcity, and it's global. Okay. It's all the industrialized nations. We're seeing talent scarcity for the first time coming out of COVID, because realize we don't have waiters, we don't have dishwashers in the restaurants to keep the doors open, right? But the reality is that's going to be the rest of the century. So one of the most important tools or skills you need to grow, especially if you're a business owner, you have to make sure your managers know how to grow talent. It's about talent management and talent development. Talent acquisition is always going to be important. Don't get me wrong, but it's not going to necessarily be there when you need it, as we've come to expect it.
Okay.
And when the baby boom was born in 1946, after World War II, until 1964, when they introduced the birth control pill, 77 million babies were born, 10,000 a day.
Right.
Well, the catch is in 2011, the first ones turned 65. And from 2011, now add 18 years to 2029, 10,000 people a day are retiring in this country. And the second problem we have is you have baby boomers like myself, where I should still be, quote unquote, working full time, but I became part of the gray resignation. I want to run my own business. So about a year ago, I opened my own consulting firm. And a third issue you have is when they introduced the birth control pill, that gave birth to Generation X. And Gen X was also known as the baby bust generation. Only about half the size of the baby boom. So there's these the lack of talent is real. And even when you look globally, Japan has roughly 125 million residents. I think that number is going to be closer to 88 million from what I read by 2060. South Korea has the lowest birth rate in the world. China is suffering from that one-child policy. I mean, when you look across the map, talent scarcity is real, and it's a little scary. So we have to learn how to grow our own. That's the new future, I think, of good leadership, which is not just HR. It's everyone who is responsible for managing and leading people.
That's awesome. I know I had 2 people say something here. Travis says, AI is replacing HR, recruiting, coding. These repetitive tasks are the vast majority of low-paying jobs and many of the middle. That's what Travis says there.
And I do agree with that. Travis is correct, Dave. I would say that. And it will start doing away with or eliminating over time, not overnight, some of these jobs that are very repetitive in nature that the computer can do for us just as easily as we can. But
Right.
again, if you're smart as an employer, you have to think about what are these skills that are going to be needed over the next 3 to 5 years, and how do you prepare your people to get skilled up in those areas?
That's what I mean on there. I want to start hitting a couple of topics on the book in here. I got to say, one of my favorite I loved was how you talked about on the one part, the top producers, sales executives, senior leaders, family members that have 30 years of experience, and how do you deal with employees like that? And I'm telling you, I love it. Just gives you ways to bring in a meeting, because I've been through that when I came out of the military into the paper industry. Everybody was 45, 50. I was 20. And then when it says also like about saying having a CEO son, and one of the major companies I worked with, they put his son with me. And
that's always fun. Mm-hmm.
Everybody was a little afraid, but it was just they were unloading over this big company here. And I was like, all right, wow, he's going to definitely know all of us. But these are kind of examples that I enjoyed reading of what you suggest, what you can do.
Yeah, how I broke it down in the book, Dave, for me was part 1 is individual crises.
Right.
2 is departmental. 3 is company-wide and geopolitical, whatever you want to throw that in there. Because you have to talk about pandemics, and you have to talk about disasters from the weather and whatnot. So that's kind of how I wanted to capture everything. But to your point about what I always call the rebel sales producer, right? It's the person who thinks, I make 80% of the branch revenue. You can't touch me. Yet they're great on the performance side month after month, but they're toxic personalities. Right. And what do? That is a little bit of a crisis when it's like, you can't put anyone with this Paul Falcone fellow because he eats his young, and he's toxic, and he's condescending, and he's confrontational, and blah, 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 blah. But they feel like you can't touch them because of their revenue.
Right.
The reality in that is, in the book, what I talk about is just draw a circle when you talk with them and cut the circle in half. And on the top half, write the word performance. And on the bottom half, write the word conduct.
Right.
And people can hold that in their imaginations. And you can say, Paul, you're doing great in the top half of the circle. You're rocking it month after month. I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I want to continue to encourage you to perform at that level so that you're making the money and you're getting the kudos. You deserve the glory. But on the bottom half of the circle, when it comes to your conduct or your behavior, truthfully, you're not really meeting muster here. And I have to hold everyone accountable for both halves of the circle, myself included. So truth be told, if I had to give you a performance review right now, you wouldn't meet expectations because you're knocking it out of the park, but only on half the equation. You know what they say, the most important decisions about your career are going to be made when you're not in the room. It's the same for you as it is for me.
That's probably the truth there. That is the truth.
So let me help you fix this now. I'll have your back. I'll make it safe. I'll be happy to be your career mentor and coach if you want me to.
Right.
But even if you don't want me to, I'm still going to hold you to the same level of expectations that I hold myself and everyone else, which means you've got it. Right. And then you say, if you can get as strong in the bottom half of that circle as you are on the top, the world is your oyster. But I don't want that to hold you back one day when they say, oh, I know Paul Falcone. He's great at sales, but he can't get along with people. He can't engender trust in his peers, and people avoid him. What you want is Paul Falcone, and I know Paul Falcone, and he's a top producer month after month, and everyone comes to him for their opinion. He's a great leader. Change from the Paul but to the Paul and let me help you do that, and it'll never hold you back in your career.
That's so again,
that's the idea of getting them to want to do this for themselves. You have a bad attitude. That's not going to get you anywhere. But if you can make it in their best interest, you'd be surprised how people turn that around.
How they turn it. I believe there's 45 chapters or 45. Yeah, it's 45 chapters, I think.
45 chapters, correct.
Yep, of what you do. And when I was reading through all these, when I got it, you sit there and you're like, oh my God, I remember this. The next one that I like, number 2 here, was discuss perception management. How do you describe that?
Yeah, the funny thing is, people will be bold in certain areas, Dave, where they think you can't prove it, I could deny it, right? Like I'm staring at someone and I'm staring them down, and they go to the boss and complain, and my answer is to go on offense and say, I wasn't doing that. He's being too sensitive. I don't know what's the matter with him. He needs to grow up, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So the reality is that performance conduct circle is one of the things I always teach.
Right.
The other thing I always teach is holding people accountable for their own perception management. And the way I explain it is I tell them, look, they used to call them PR firms. Now they call them perception management firms. It's the same thing. Perception is reality until proven otherwise. And I have to hold you accountable for your own perception management, which means regardless of how you think you're coming across, I measure you in the eyes of your peers.
Okay.
Just like I measure them in your eyes. So your accountability level is not just for trying to control or put them down for how they're feeling. This was not something where I was inviting you into this meeting so that you could put them down. Okay. The reality is, you're going on offense here. You need to be playing defense. I'm on offense. And I'm holding you accountable for the perception you create in the eyes of your coworkers going forward. And if there are any more complaints in these areas, you need to know I may be forced to respond in a disciplinary manner, which I do not want to do. And I don't want you to have to put me in that situation. But let's talk about this now and make sure we're coming from the same, we're singing from the same hymn book, because we got to get on the same page with this real quick.
Same page. And then the part where it comes in about talking, and this one, we talk about employment at will, and then we talk about all the problems like we're going over here tonight, and they say employment at will, but yet then we talk in the book here, it's like in each different state. Why, if it's employment at will, is it mainly people that they really think they're going to get sued versus employment at will is they don't have to give you a reason. But the way I was reading it here too, it's not all the time people use that. They want to go ahead and, they take you through the progressive area discipline, which I believe in. I really do. I believe that's just me. I wish I would have done that more so years and years ago. Before it was just like, we're just going to let you go. Let them go. Get rid of them. You know what? You can't do that. That's the way I feel. I feel the employees they need a chance to change. Unless, like you said in the book here, if it's something real serious, like that's easy. That, something stealing, anything like that, there's nothing like that. But what's the difference with employment at will versus actually using it versus all the problems that you have with employees?
Yeah, this is the $1,000 question. When I was teaching at UCLA, I got this question all the time. My managers, even at the highest levels of the organization, think that persons at will, that means we can get rid of them at will. It's like, no, it doesn't. Employment at will exists in the courtroom. It does not exist in the workplace. And don't fool yourself. It's called the employment at will affirmative defense. And when something goes to a hearing, the company wants to make it disappear. And they're going to use, the defense lawyers representing the company are going to use the employment at will affirmative defense. And they're going to say, look, Your Honor, I'm sorry that Paul Falcone wasn't happy with the reason he was given for his termination. Right? But the reality is he's employed at will. And he signed it in his offer letter. He signed it in the handbook. He signed it in this. He signed it in that. And we did nothing to abrogate the employment at will relationship. So with all due respect, Your Honor, we want to go home. We want an immediate dismissal of the case, known as a summary judgment. Can we please just go home?
Right.
But now the plaintiff attorney stands up and says, whoa, hang on one second. He is at will and he did sign all those things. But from the facts that we see here, it does look like he was treated differently because of his blank. Now fill in the blank. His age, his race, he's pregnant. He got a recent workers' comp claim. There's all these exceptions to employment at will. And so if the judge says at the hearing stage, I want to hear this in court, we're going to take this to trial. Okay, then at that point, you basically have to show you had cause. Right. And if it wasn't written down, they're going to argue he said, she said, and everything else. And if it wasn't written down, it never happened. So the point is this: without a crystal ball, you don't know if you're going to get a summary judgment at the hearing stage using the employment at will affirmative defense. Okay. You have to always be able to go to trial and win at trial by being able to show that you had documentation. The documentation is like the garlic that keeps the vampires away. Okay, it really is. And if you don't have it and that's going to trial, you got to settle outside of court. It's going to cost you a lot of money.
But you talk about no defense. But you talk about, which I like in the book, is a path of least resistance. So I kind of looked at that versus when you said about the creating progressive disciplinary in a bunch of your books about verbal, written, final termination. It's not rocket scientists, But why do what happens? Why do you think people just don't want to deal with it, I guess. Do they want to just take you from a verbal to a termination, or it's really great to go in that progression, right?
Yeah, oh, it's only fair. The whole idea of documenting discipline is what's known as workplace due process. Very
Right.
basically, Dave, the employee needs to know what the problem is. The employee needs to know what he or she needs to do in order to fix the problem. You got to
Right.
give them a reasonable period of time to fix the problem. And then they have to know the consequences of inaction, which means you're putting that in the documentation. And progressive discipline works. In most cases, in my experience, number one, it will turn an employee around for the better because they realize they're going to get in trouble. Okay, so
Right.
that's real. Sometimes the employee 3 months later just disappears. They tender their resignation because they started looking for another job and they leave on
Right.
their own. And there's nothing wrong with that. God love them. Be successful. I'm fine
Right.
with that, but not
Yep.
here. That's okay. But if it does go to litigation, like I say, you have to be prepared to show that you accorded due process. And you do that in the form of discipline because it gives the employee a fighting chance to keep their job.
Right.
Now, to answer your question, a lot of times the managers' path of least resistance is avoidance. They look the other way.
Yep.
They don't
I
invite.
did
They
it.
don't,
I did
right?
it.
Oh, I hear you. It's like, don't tell
Yep.
HR, don't tell your boss. And
Yep.
then all of a sudden, some proverbial straw is broken on the camel's back. And then they run into my office in HR and they
Right.
want the person gone. And it's like, well, if it's theft, if it's embezzlement, if it's fraud, if it's forgery, yeah, that's a summary offense. That's a one and
Right.
done. But if it's not those things and you didn't document this, then you know what? We got to start the documentation process. Here's the catch, Dave, and this is where it depends on the states. In California, where I am, you ask most defense lawyers, what percentage of cases are dismissed at the hearing stage, getting a summary judgment, versus what percentage go to trial? Most California lawyers that I've spoken to on this particular topic, and it's at least a half dozen, all had the same answer. Less than 10% get
Wow.
dismissed at the hearing stage. 90% will go to trial. So you better be prepared to have your documentation in place and have your ducks in order. Now, in other states, it's not like that. Other states, lawyers will tell you 50-50. It depends if it's an employee-friendly state or an employer-friendly state.
Right.
But still, the point is, in essence, there are some attorneys out there that say don't give any discipline. If you don't give progressive discipline to anyone, you can manage a pure employment at will relationship because you have no record, you have no practice of giving progressive
Right.
discipline to anyone else. Okay, that's fine. Maybe that'll help your employee relations practice, but no one's going to want to work for you. Because what
Right.
that basically says is they walk in on Monday and there's a box on their desk and get out. You're not welcome here anymore. Well, guess what? That's going to get out.
It's going to get
And
out.
your
Yep.
employees are going to realize that's how they treat people around here. And
Yes.
you're going to have a hard time finding people. So that, again, just be reasonable about this. If it were you or if it were your child, you would hope that an employer would give you and or your kid a chance to turn things around rather than press a magic button and make them pop out of the toaster and be gone.
And that's what I mean. And that's what I like about the book, everybody, because when you're reading different chapters here, this is what it talks about here. And as simple as that is, that question can really, look, it brings up a great conversation. And that's what I like about the book, again, is it really makes you talk about it. Just walk through, because you can have different examples of what to do. Rob had asked, does an employee have a chance if it goes to court? Rob asked. Yes. He just asked that. If it has a chance to go to court.
Does an employee have a chance if it goes to court? Well, yeah. I mean, it all depends on whether you can find an attorney to represent you. And it depends on each case. Each case hangs on the facts. So the answer would be yes. But here's a thought too. And if you don't mind, Dave, I'll just say for real quick.
Nope.
When you're going to terminate someone, don't do it Friday afternoon at 5:00 and sweep them out the door, push them under the rug like they never existed. That's a mistake. Right. Termination should happen early in the day, early in the week. Do it Monday or Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. The reason is people have questions. People want to talk to somebody.
Yes.
And it's humane to do it so that I tell people when I terminate them, even for a cause, it's like, thank you for everything you've done for us. You're right. I mean, unless they stole from us. I mean, that's different. But shy of that scenario, it's like, make me your concierge. I will help you if you need help with your unemployment claim, your COBRA application, if you need help with your resume, if you want to even role play about interviewing. I'll be there for you. Call me anytime. Because the funny thing is, a lot of workplace violence happens on Monday morning. Why? Because they sweep them out on Friday afternoon, and to an unstable mind, now they have 2 days to sit on it with no one to talk to.
Yeah.
And then God forbid, Monday morning, they seek their revenge. So again, I'm just saying, be kind.
And you put that in the book there about that's exactly what you said, because you put minor problems, not warranty right. Oh, it helps showing employees what is wrong. I'm sorry, about helping them out. Talk about the resume. A lot of people might say that's kind of weird, or that I don't agree with that. You know what? I think you got to try different things. I think it can really help. Some people know when they're going to be let go. They know it's coming, and if you give them an opportunity to show or help them, it could be different, and I believe it could be.
Well, the funny thing is I only offer a vision. I'm not saying that everything I do, everyone is going to agree with. So pick and choose what you like. But I do think you need to have your own leadership philosophy. What is your leadership brand? How do people define you? Even when I'm doing executive coaching, Dave, the question is, would you want to work for you? And or with that top sales producer, the question is, if the whole company followed your lead in terms of your behavior, would you be happy with where you took it?
Right.
You've got to drive this career introspection. I want people thinking about things. I don't want them coming in like automatons doing their work every day, day in and day out, without giving greater thought to how do they add value to the company. I tell people, my employees on my team, do not live a comma life. I do not care that you do phones, comma, filing, comma, correspondence, comma. I want to know, why is it a better company for your having done those things?
We have it.
And again, depending on what you do, can you quantify it for me? That's what I want. Increased revenue, decreased expenses, saved time, system rollouts. Like, let's help put numbers on this. I want them to think about bullets they're putting on their resume and their LinkedIn profile and their self-evaluation, because that's how you create that achievement mentality around people. And that's really critical.
It is, and that's awesome. Daryl says, so why don't they do it on Friday at 4:30, last day of the pay period and month?
Daryl, the answer is because they sweep things under the rug and they look the other way. And that's the reality. It's the path of least resistance over and over again. And they think, well, that's how everyone does it. And it's like, I don't care that that's how everyone does it. I think for us, what makes the most sense, Dave, is be your own leader. Create your own ecosystem underneath you. I don't care what bullets are flying over your head from your manager. Don't use that as a justification to rain down hell on your people. That's not what it is. The buck needs to stop with you, and you create that leadership brand that you want to be known for, no matter what's going on above you.
What it is. Robert Reed here. Hi, Robert. How you doing? It says, what is required of states that don't have employee at will, since it appears they both require a paper trail?
Yeah, at this point, it's a good question, Robert. At this point, I think Montana is a state that does not have employment at will, but I'm not sure if there are others. The bottom line is, if it doesn't have employment at will, it reverts to this standard of termination for just cause only. Now, that's what existed in the United States when we were founded in the 18th century. We borrowed it from British law. Termination for just cause only basically said that the right to work was so fundamental to American citizens that it should not be taken away arbitrarily. Where that changed was at the time of the Great Depression. Congress came together and passed a series of laws that created this concept of employment at will. And we know what it looked like because we saw the movies, right? It's the factory with guys, usually guys, lined up down the street to get in. One guy hurts his back, he's fired, gets the next one in. One guy gets killed, he's done, get a next one in. And it was crazy. But then we went into World War II. And after the war, we never rescinded employment at will from the books. I don't think it was ever intended to continue, but it did. And then in 1980, the final change on this was in California. It was a case called Tammany versus, I think it was Arco Oil, if I'm not mistaken, Dave. But basically, California said, wait, there can be exceptions to employment at will. Basically, you can't terminate someone, quote unquote, at will if you're violating the public trust or you're violating public policy. Once they put that exception to employment at will, employment law firms grew all over the country. That was it. There was a new field of law, and this tort of wrongful termination and then harassment and these other things all kind of came into play. So it's interesting. This doesn't go back to World War II. This only goes back to about 1980, but that's when we saw the growth of the employment law bar. And now we see it all over the place.
You see it. The next part I like too is, again, people, leading through crisis, what I like about this is it talks about, even when we talk about layoffs, you put in there, whether positions were eliminated, layoff versus furlough, reduce hours. You talked about reduction in the force, permanent elimination. Give examples on how you say it. That's what I liked about too. When you get into that part, it really gives you how you talked about. It comes down, you got to have some people skills when you do this too. This is not something, because it comes down, look, it looks to me, a lot of it, what you wrote in here, it's the wording. How you say something is one of the important that I've learned through this part on this thing.
And the funny thing is, managers, you have to leave this up to experience, right?
Right.
Experience is your teacher. So you're a manager now, Paul Falcone. Congratulations. Go figure it out.
Right.
Well, the problem is when they're figuring it out, they're stepping on landmines left and right, and they don't even know what they don't even
Right.
know. Because again, this idea of leadership in the trenches is not taught in
Right.
business schools. It's not even taught in corporate programs, because those are more compliance related. And it's funny, Dave, we've kind of lost the ability to sit around the campfire and have the elders pass
Right.
wisdom down to the younger generation. We've become too busy for that. So the reality to all this is, again, my goal is to give you my 3 decades of experience, really, and the fact that I've written all those other books. And it's like, let me be your coach. Let me be your mentor. That's the style that I like to write in. And I don't want you to feel like you're doing this all alone, because it is hard. Other examples in the book, think about it. M&A, mergers and acquisitions. My company's going to be bought. What's going to happen to my job? Or, oh, wait, I heard our employees are talking to the union tonight at the pizzeria. Quick, what do I do? These are things these are hard for managers, and trying to divine the answers. Yeah, good luck. And the same to the point about, well, what about worker burnout? What about managing remote employees? That's not going away anytime soon. These things fall through the cracks in our society. I wanted a book that just hits the nail on the head and gives everyone a real quick education on how to approach it. And again, to your point, what to say and how to coach your own employees through these things.
Yeah, because what I like, again, the choices, and you give sometimes 2 to 3 different choices. I like how you do you write a story about what's happened in the office, and you've given 2 or 3 examples of it, so it can go either way, and that's what I like about it, because nobody teaches you this really. It's what I've learned when I was evolving, I always say, is I just watched. I'd be in meetings, I'd be like, wow, he's like 25 years older. I mean, he's yelling, he's complaining, they're the union reps, we're going back and forth, and I'm just like, whoa, how in the world do you learn this stuff? Because it's not in a book. It wasn't in the book then.
Yeah, I know. If anything, when people say, Paul, what makes your writing stand out? I'd like to think that it's because I teach the how. Everybody knows what to do. There should be no sexual harassment, right? There's 2 types of sexual harassment, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I know. And you take that training and it's like, okay, so now you know the 2 types of sexual harassment.
Right.
I want to give you the script so that you can talk to your employees about what it means to you. That's what I call values-based leadership, and how you expect that respect is going to basically be the rule of the day. I don't care about what's going on with performance. You guys need to know who I am. And I expect everyone to have one another's backs at all times. I expect you all to practice role model leadership.
I like that.
And I expect us to bring out the best in everyone else, to help everyone through their careers, because we're all in this together. And that means when it comes to anything like harassment or discrimination, you guys, none of us should ever tolerate any of that. And you need to know that that is a third rail issue for me. Like, I grew up in New York, right on the, if you fall into where the trains come, don't touch that third rail. You touch the third rail, you're going to be bacon by the time your knees hit the ground. So that can never happen. But giving people it's like, here's the script, make of it what you want, but talk to your employees about this. And it makes the problems go away before they have a chance to really creep in.
It will, because again, you kept saying there a couple of times about the path of least resistance. And when it comes down to it, let me get to these 2 here. Daryl says, leadership in the trenches was taught to me, but the civilian community, it doesn't want it too much. I know we're like the military. And Daryl, that confidence, I think that's what he's saying there, is from when he was in a civilian versus military, I'm sure, on that part.
It's a quick thought. Military training is second to none. We've got the best training in the world that's happening in our military. And truthfully, we can borrow a lot of it and benefit from it in the private sector. There's no doubt in my mind. Dave, I know you were involved in the military. Personally, I went to a military high school in New York City. It was a Jesuit Army JROTC high school. But beyond that, I work as a career coach with the Honor Foundation, which works with the Navy SEALs and
Wow.
the
That's
special ops forces, when they're transitioning into the private sector, they get a coach. So I do that kind of work, which I love. I write for Homeland Magazine and San Diego Veterans Magazine. I co-wrote a book called Boots to Loafers, Finding Your New True North. To me, my goal is to help transitioning veterans
transition. Yeah.
find their feet. But I'll tell you what, as they move into the private sector, they need to share some of those wisdom nuggets, because in
Right.
the private sector, much is missing, especially the discipline, the commitment, there's a lot there that we could benefit from. And I hope
Yeah, I
anyone
think it
listening who
helps.
is in
It's
that
helped me.
situation.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
it has.
absolutely.
I still use a lot of what I've learned then here. Let's see. Robert asked you, if an employee wins in court, how are they made whole? Compensation?
Yeah, it depends, Robert. It's a good question. A lot of it will depend on the state, and a lot of it will depend on their status. Are they union or are they non-union? In a union environment, it's typically reinstatement plus back pay, right? So if you were terminated 6 months ago, but then they find in your favor, basically you get your job back plus you get all the pay in that period of time when you weren't there because the company wrongfully terminated you. In the non-union sector, oftentimes they're not looking to get the job back. They're just looking for damages. So the wrongful termination complaint is the kind of the shiv. That's how they put that in the door. That's like the
Right.
doorstop to keep the door open. But really where plaintiff attorneys want to go is to issues of discrimination and harassment and retaliation, because there could be punitive damage potential against the company. So they're looking for money payouts. Of course, they'll only take the case if they believe that you were wrongfully terminated. If you quit, for example, there can be situations where they'll still take your case. This idea of constructive discharge, which basically means any reasonable person would have quit because it was so intolerable working there.
Right.
But each lawyer will look at the facts and then determine. So if one lawyer says no, you end up looking for other lawyers who will probably be more inclined to take the case.
For
But
that.
there's the difference between a non-union world and a union world.
Right. We've got one more here from Travis again. The dedication, motivation, inclusion process are fantastic. Most industrial organization leadership is stagnation of soiled knowledge without competition to integrate for growth, much like many companies.
Yeah, Travis, again, you talk about dedication, you talk about motivation, you talk about loyalty, you talk about pride. Those are not things that are being discussed in the corporate classroom.
Right.
Not in my experience.
Yep.
But because they are so motivational. The idea of motivation is I can't motivate you. You can't motivate me. All motivation is self-motivation. So I always tell managers, you can leave your pom-poms at home. That's the easy part.
Right.
You're not responsible for motivating anyone because you couldn't if you tried. But you are responsible for creating a work environment where people can motivate themselves. And that's where you need to be thinking about, what can I do to help my people motivate themselves? And it all comes down to character and caring. It's the 2 C's. If they respect you because they trust you, and there's a book I had written, Dave, on mastering ethical leadership. And this idea of, do they trust your character? Is that relationship strong? And do you care? Remember, even going back to Gen Y and Gen Z, as we study them, they want to work for an ethical company,
right,
doing meaningful work for a management team or a manager that cares about them personally. That's it. This is not that hard. We sometimes overthink this stuff. Well, I'm a manager now, so you can't do that. It's like, yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
You be the average bear. If you would like it, if you think it would be cool to have someone call you out and say, boy, Paul, you really did a great job with that. Share that with us. How did you turn that around? How did you make that sale?
Right.
Well, it's not going to go to their head and make them arrogant and make them want more money. Would it do that for you? And the manager says, well, no, not me. No, it wouldn't. Well, it's like, then give freely. Recognition and praise cost you nothing. But
right.
That's the psychic income that glues people to any company. That's what makes them thrive. So don't feel like, well, I can't tell them they're doing a great job because it's going to go to their head. That's the noise we tell ourselves that we need to cut through.
And I agree. I want to see if I can get this out right now. What I've noticed, Paul, in the books, there's so many things that we talk about here are little. I mean, again, for just little things that drive everybody crazy in the meetings, it gives you examples versus like how you're doing your job right or anything, or production's low or anything. You know how the books are out about that, saying about how do you motivate for people for work, motivation. But here, there's just so much that ties you up in so much times of your day that if I really believe if somebody would read some of these, that they could learn to get away with that and have time for other things. By confronting the issues, you're going to gain more time and doing things that employees are going to like more. That's just me.
No, I totally agree, Dave. So in that 5-book series, one of the books was called Leadership Offense and one was called Leadership Defense. And I just take the sports metaphor, right? Offense is growing and developing your people, growing talent, motivating, all this kind of stuff. Leadership defense is accountability, knowing how to hold tough conversations, knowing how to document and structure terminations. You've got to do both. You can't do it all with a carrot. I don't judge anybody, but some people aren't really all that into the job, or for whatever reason, you have to have the leadership defense piece ready to go as well. And I think that if we change our sponsoring thought about who we are as a leader and what our brand is going to be and what I want people to say about me when I run into them 20 years from now in the mall.
Right.
If someone says, Paul, I always give the example of Ashley, who was on my team at one of my companies, and she was the coordinator. She was fabulous at what she did. And now she's a senior VP of human resources at DreamWorks Animation. Wonderful. But I ran into her and she's like, Paul, I could have never gotten to this point in my career without you. I still think WWPD, what would Paul do? You influenced me so much, et cetera. The point, Dave, is that's why we work. It's not for the paycheck. It's not for the benefits, although we need those.
Right.
It's, leadership is the greatest gift the workplace offers. It helps you touch people's lives, grow people's careers. It's very rare that you get a chance to have that kind of influence on people's lives. If we could look at it that way, we would see it all as a blessing. And it's really kind of a cool thing. It's a nice place to be.
That's awesome. Another part I liked, one of the chapters on employee assisted programs, the EAP. When you talk about employees in crisis, agitation employees, moods, blaming others. One problem turns into too many, goals shift, gossip, employee taking sides, substance abuse. How do you deal with all that when you have multiple people like that? You have multiple employees going through with that. There again, I don't think that's utilized as much as it should be.
Yeah.
It's there. I wanted to ask you, can they request to go? Can you mandate? Because we talked in there about mandating. You can't mandate somebody to get help if they need it, I'm sure. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong. You're correct. So here's the scoop with these, what I call dysfunctional team turnarounds. If you can become known for turnaround leadership, it basically means they could pop you in anywhere in the company, and within 3 to 6 months, you'll turn around a dysfunctional team.
Right.
That is probably the most value you can offer in your managerial career, and will lead you to the C-suite just about faster than anything you could imagine. But the idea is there are situations where on the one side, when an employee starts going down the path of, well, Paul, I have this illness, I'll stop them right there. And I'll say, first of all, I'm not your best resource to help with this. Right. And number two, I'm not even supposed to know as your manager. With all due respect, there are privacy differences. But let me do this. There's this 800 number that you can call, and they have counselors on site that can help you. And they help with anything from, employee problems, family problems. I need a lawyer. I need an accountant. I've got a drug problem, whatever. You can do that all on your own for you or your family by reaching out to this EAP. And I'd advise you, use them as much as you can. It's a benefit that you get. And
I think it's great. I do. That's me.
Yeah. Now, the flip side, Dave, to your question is, can you mandate it? There are exceptions when you can mandate it. And it gets a little technical. I write about more in the book.
Is that like about the safety aspect and all that too that you talked about?
Yeah. If you expect someone might be thinking about suicide.
Yeah, suicide and psychological safety.
Right, or homicide or something along those lines. You can make what they call a mandatory referral. But you would need to probably involve your attorney at doing that and the EAP counselor before you do it. And the reason is the Americans with Disabilities Act, when it was passed in the 90s, was done with very good intention. But the way the bar interprets these things, the plaintiff bar, the law basically said if someone has a disability, including a mental disability, has a record of having a disability, or even appears to have a disability, they're covered by the law.
Right.
And what plaintiff attorneys have said is by making a mandatory EAP referral, by making it a condition of employment, if you don't go, we're going to fire you.
Right.
Basically, Mr. Employer, you're admitting that Paul Falcone had a mental disability that you formally recognized and you did not accommodate.
Right.
And all of a sudden, they're coming after you for disability discrimination, which carries with it the potential for punitive damages.
For that.
So you've got to be careful about this stuff. So if you're going to make it mandatory, that's when, use your employment lawyer, either internal or external, to get some insights on how to do this the right way. And then make sure that your EAP contact is in the loop with what you're thinking. And then the EAP can walk you through, Paul, this is how we'll do it. There are certain conditions we have to follow. We can't just make it mandatory. For example, he has to have or she has to have a performance problem, but linked to that performance problem, you're making a mandatory referral, blah, 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 blah. There's steps. It's in the book, but
but what I like about that is for a first-time manager. Now, when I read that, when the way you're talking about there, it's a serious, so that should tell that first-time manager, wow, I need help. This is not something that I can do myself. Like, when it would come to that, that's out of my league. That's where I would be like to my manager, their managers, because I think this is what a first-time manager would learn from what you wrote there was, listen, this is serious stuff here. You can't just look at it, think it's not going to happen, because one day, it just takes one day that can happen.
Yep. And this is a collection of all those one days. Honestly, Dave, this is really what the book was. I mean, think about, pandemics. Think about what we're going through with hurricanes or earthquakes.
Right.
You have to have a game plan and you have to be in control in situations like this. I mean, there's war. The politics are crazy. One of the chapters I talk about is making it safe for employees to talk about things that are going on in their personal lives. Now, I would normally never recommend that. I would always say religion, politics stays out of the office. But there can be cases where I tell my people, this is not about red hats and blue hats. We're not talking about that. I just want to know how this is impacting you. You guys, how do you feel? And can we help? Do any of us need to support you in what you're doing? Or, can we help with anything? Now, some people out there listening may say, I would never do that with my employees. And that's okay. I'm fine with that. But I did it with mine. Because sometimes you can just feel when the angst and the tension is so steeped, it's so heightened. It's like, you know what, you guys, let's just talk. Let's relax a little bit. I just want to hear how you're doing and tell me what I can do to help and what we can do collectively to help any of you.
And it brings a conversation. It brings that conversation. And again, they're the kinds of things that I learned from this. And I really, if anybody's out there, when they're listening to this about I don't care if you got 10 years of management, it doesn't matter. It's just a good read on that part. Because another part that I liked about it was, you discussed encouraging employees to leave when you don't have, let me back this up, no progressive discipline. And sometimes people just want to get rid of the person. So they don't want to go through all that. But I think what you're talking about here talked about encouraging employees to leave and having no progressive disciplinary documentation, third-party HR, to bring a third party into it. So are you talking about, is that the HR as a third party?
Yeah, typically, unless the company doesn't have HR if they're smaller.
Right, that can be a boss.
Yeah, but as a rule, Dave, my point is this: leadership is a team sport. Okay, it is not, well, I'm the manager, so I have all the answers. That's not what it is. You have to know how to keep your ducks in order and your allies in the loop. Your first ally is always your boss. And then your second ally is to your side, who should be your HR person. If your company doesn't have HR, it may be your in-house lawyer, whatever it happens to be. But the point is, make sure people know what you're doing. You don't ever want to be in a situation where you're deemed to be, quote unquote, acting outside the course and scope of your managerial authority. You can get in trouble. In most states, people don't realize this. Managers could be sued for up to $50,000 of their own money. For what they call managerial bad acts. And in some states like California, there is no cap. And managers are like, no one ever told me that. I'm like, that's why I'm here. Okay. I want you guys to understand that you can't just flippantly say, oh, I'm firing this one, or I don't care that this one is pregnant, or I don't care that this one, forget it, you guys. There's too much liability. We don't pay you enough in terms of your salary to take on this kind of personal liability. Get that hot potato off your lap.
Well, because I think when you said that, there is a third party by bringing somebody in different out of the scenario. Is that what you're saying too? Like another manager out of another department, let's just say an example. I've seen that to where they brought somebody in that didn't really know any of us. And they would sit in there and they would be that person to give you some advice to sit back and say, wow, either like these are screwed up or something. you know.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think, well, part of it is you want to witness at certain
Right.
times, right? Because it could be a
Right.
he said, she said, and it's not a bad idea to have a witness when there's something that's potentially adversarial. But the other thought is if you have that objective third party in there, they can play the role of referee. They
Right.
can calm things down. They don't have any baggage. Theoretically, they're objective, or at least they should be objective in terms of helping both sides reach a conclusion.
Agreement.
So yeah.
Yeah. Robert asked, is a woman required in a job interview to mention she is currently pregnant?
No, it's a good question, Robert. No, a woman is not. Now, what happens is at times women will interview and say, you probably can't tell, but I just want to let you know I'm pregnant and my due date is blah, 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 blah. They can certainly do that. That is full transparency and that is good faith. They can do that, but there's no law that says they have an obligation to disclose it. And if you hire someone who starts to show 3 months later, it is what it is. Pregnancy is protected under every law that's out there. In California, they have a famous law that says don't mess with mommies, but other states have similar
Right.
types of laws. It is the cost of doing business. And if that happens and you're a business owner, look, it is what it is. Move forward with grace and be as supportive as you possibly can. So
I just think that's just part of life. That's what I say. Because I had one boss that told me all the time, so what? They're going to be back in 6 to 8 weeks. And then, just encourage the employee, talk with them, congratulate.
Yeah.
It's part of life because it can happen to you,
Well, listen, the funny thing is you can hire someone who's not pregnant and they get hit by a car.
Right.
Cost of doing business. What are you going to, they should have told me they were going to get hit by a car. Just don't go there. You're going to be safer in your career if you have I would say put it in a box and put a box up on the shelf. I know it could feel frustrating, but that's not really what it's at. This falls under cost of doing business. Just let it be and find your peace with that.
Yeah. Got a couple more things, girls. I'll tell you what, I'm definitely going to have you back because there's so much more I want to talk about. But this next one I liked about is dealing effective with attitude problems. Again, path of least resistance, meet with the employees, how to discuss, how can we help, avoid attitude, replacing behavior and conduct. It's got to come out something positive also out of all that, because it's all, if you let that person go on, they have attitude problems. And one of the parts I believe you were talking about when they take 6 months off or something, and they're coming back, the person leaves with an attitude problem, and everybody opens up, and everything is back to normal. Then that person comes back. What do you do? Maybe I'm old school now, but I just think they don't address the attitude. And that can drive a first-time manager to lose more hair than I have, because that's what I blame it. Because I used to have so many attitudes, and nobody sat me down besides in the union and said, well, just don't worry about it. That's just them. As a first-time manager, that would freaking drive you insane.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the scoop. Here's the truth. We go back to the generations, right?
Yep.
They want career and professional feedback and development. What does that mean? Well, on the one hand, it means recognize them for doing a job that, hey, listen, you rocked it. You knocked it out of the park. I want to make sure everyone knows that, right? Praise in public, censure in private. It's that kind of idea. But it also means giving them course corrective feedback in real time, not sweeping things under the rug and looking the other way. Because what happens is that gets caught in your throat and you keep swallowing and swallowing and swallowing until that proverbial magic straw is broken, and then kaboom, now you want the guy fired. Way too much drama. I don't do drama.
Right.
So the reality is this. Number one, to your point, Dave, don't use the word attitude. Don't tell someone you've got a bad attitude. That is a fighting word. And don't put in your documentation if you discipline them.
Replace it with behavioral and conduct.
You are reading the book, my friend. That is right. You can say there's a conduct issue or a behavioral issue, but don't say attitude. That's a bad word. Courts have thrown out the documentation and said that's not even legitimate. That's just a difference in opinion.
Right.
But again, when you sit with someone and you talk about what you really want to say is, you know what, Paul, you've really got a bad attitude. Replace it with painting a picture with words. Paul, let me share with you what it looks like from my vantage point at times.
Right.
That's the opener. Not you always do that. You never do that. Forget always and never. That's not true. It's an exaggeration, and it's just going to make them mad and make them hunker down because now everybody's angry. But Paul, at times, from my vantage point, it does appear that you can come across as condescending, confrontational. And I don't mean to hurt your feelings, and I'm not trying to judge you, but the word I've heard used is arrogant.
Right.
I want to talk to you about that because maybe you don't see it, but I do as your manager. And I want to use this as a coaching opportunity. Okay. I'm not beating you on this, but it is something that I think is real enough that you may suspect that you kind of know you're doing it at times.
Right.
But if this is something that we can fix together, I don't want it to hold you back in your career. I don't want you to be Paul, but he's got an attitude. I want it to be Paul and he's a role model. I want Paul to be the one who sets the tone for everybody else, that people seek him out for his advice and his guidance. Let's talk about it a little bit. Tell me your
you even
thoughts.
asked about that. You said you gave two, I think it was two different ways that you could actually talk with that employee and say, I want to let you know how it makes me feel. I thought about that. I had to read it twice. I was like, would I say that? I've never done that. I've never been in a meeting and said, you make me feel like this when you say this. I want you to know. And I'm thinking, it just made me think. I'm thinking, well, maybe I should try it. I'm like, you make me feel when you talk like this, out loud or anything. Because as a first-time manager, again, I get worked up on this stuff is because it will drive you insane because nobody's going to teach you how to do it and what to say.
So the first thing, Dave, I would say, remember, First-Time Manager is the series.
Right.
Okay. The book is...
I've been a first-time one for 25 years, I think. I don't think it's ever going to be a second.
Well, that's the funny thing. No, I get it. But the book is on leading through crisis. And the crisis,
Right.
again, individual, departmental, company, and the world. So it's like, how do you deal with all this stuff? Yeah. But I think the reality is if you can sit with someone... Here was my example. I was the HR guy sitting in someone else's staff meeting because they invited me to go. And the way one employee was talking to the manager made me shrink in my chair. Like, oh my God, is this really how the... And I said to the manager afterwards, are you okay? I mean, why would you let him talk to you that way? And the manager said to me, Paul, you don't know what it's like working with him. You live in your HR ivory tower. It's really tough. And if I confront her or him or whatever, it's going to be Armageddon. And I just don't have the time. And I said to the manager, well, that kind of behavior is actually disciplinary behavior. And he said, yeah, but I'm not going to start with documented verbal warnings. I don't have time. And I said, actually, what I saw in that meeting just now was a final written warning.
Right.
And they looked at me and they were like, what? I thought everything had to start with a verbal. And I said, with performance, it does. And with attendance, it does. But with conduct, it doesn't. Just like you can go from 0 to termination for fraud, theft, embezzlement, forgery. You can go 0 to final written warning for gross insubordination or anything along those lines. And they were like, really? See, that's why I say managers don't know what their rights are either because they don't train this stuff. Yeah. This is what I'm talking about. It's a little bit of bringing fire to the cavemen, but in a sense where I've been in these trenches for 3 decades across multiple industries, across multiple countries. And it's like managers don't know where their rights begin and end. You've got to give them their spine back.
Right.
And again, if they can do it, I call it an iron hand and a velvet glove. They need to be confident about what they're able to do, and they need to know what they shouldn't be doing, but they have to be able to deliver it in a way that is caring, yet holds people highly accountable.
Right.
And I think that's where the match happens.
When you talk with companies, like when I listened to what you said there, how do you get them to provide training like for first-time supervisors? Do you say, okay, here's a book, go ahead and read it? Now, I will say years and years ago, we used to have people come and talk. We used to have a lot of that with webinars, kind of way like that, training, just watching little videos and everything like that. But I still believe there still needs to be more for let people know what you're gonna come into. Because I think if I knew then, I'd still probably do it. But the military helped me. If it wasn't for the military coming right out of there, going into that 20-year-old with a 50-year-old out of the paper industry in a union shop, everybody was twice your age. That really taught me right there about respect, about trying how to get that employee to kind of like you. I know it sounds weird, but in the union, if they didn't like you, it was a tough pill, boy. Whew.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Dave, let me say that one quick thought on that. Yeah. So my logic is tell me about your favorite boss. And when I do this in my UCLA class, or I do it in companies, people raise their hands and you start hearing things like, well, my favorite boss was someone who really had my back. She made me feel like I could do no wrong. Or My favorite boss was someone who challenged me to do things that I didn't even think I was ready for. She
Right.
seemed to have more faith in me than I had in myself. My question after we go through 5 or 6 of these examples is, are you describing their beingness or their doingness? In other words, is this who they were or is it what they did?
Right.
And usually, I know it's both, but which one would you pick? And they usually start with, well, it's what he did or what she did. And then as they're talking it through, someone in the room invariably says, well, you know what? I think it's who they were.
Who they
And
were.
it's who they were that drove what they did.
Yep.
And it's like, bingo, you just hit the nail on the head. Maya Angelou, the American poet, said, people may not remember what you said. People may not remember what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
That's true. I
So
agree with that. Yeah.
the reality becomes the best bosses are the ones who have your back. The best bosses are the ones who give you room to learn and grow. The best bosses show an interest in your career and professional development. The best bosses just give you that warm and fuzzy. And we're human beings, which means in the 2nd grade, we did the best work for our favorite teacher.
Right.
And as the saying goes for non-humans, happy cows make more milk. How do you
That's the
create
truth.
the right in certain circumstances to make your employees fall in love with the company and
Right.
become their favorite boss? That's the prism. Favorite boss pulls it all together: discretionary effort, innovation and creativity,
Right.
loyalty, trust. It all goes together with that very simple thing. Am I paying it forward? Am I being to my employees what my favorite boss was to me? If you just do that exercise alone, your career will skyrocket.
Yeah, because you can always remember that stuff. That's the easiest stuff. I still learn it all. I can't go. I keep going back and forth. And that's why I told you. I think would I miss management, and I think my best thing what I love again about the books is, again, I wish I would have had them, but now I would like to teach somebody to like I watch and I'm like, oh, been there, done that. I watch it sometimes. I'm like, why won't you do this? And Dave, it's not me. It's not my job. But you see the mistakes you made and you really want them to learn, and this book here will do that.
Thank you.
One more thing I want to talk about tonight is the big one here is performance appraisal that you talked about. When you get a new team or you get new employees coming onto your team that have been with the companies for a while, and you start doing their performance reviews and you start going into them, this here walks you through a lot of things I wouldn't have thought of is you need to do your research on the employee too. That would really help, because how can you, I've only known you 2 months, you've been with the company 10 years, you're coming over to me and you could be in a problem. You could have been a problem child. You could have been something like that. But I think you really need to do that, because that person in the reviews is expecting, wow, I've done all these great things. And this here gives you, it's like, no, you really have choices to do in that perspective.
Yeah, when it's an internal transfer, you got to do your due diligence. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're having a problem with an old boss, I assume you're going to be a problem child on my team. I don't judge. I come from observation. I have the right to do that. But no one wants to be judged, and I don't want to judge anybody.
Right.
But at the same time, you have to set the expectations. So I'm going to look in their personnel file. I'm going to look at their prior performance reviews to get a feel for how they've typically been graded. And I'm also going to talk to their last supervisor, because I want to get a feel for strengths and weaknesses, which usually happens before I hire that person. But let's assume it didn't. I still want to go back and do the due diligence by talking to them. And in a lot of companies in a transition year, where you may only have the person for 2 months or 6 months, and then the performance reviews are due, they'll actually do a joint review where you can put PF, Paul Falcone's comments, and then, JD, John Doe, that person's comments and whatever. And you can kind of bifurcate. You can separate the feedback. So it's a joint feedback. And that's okay too. You can also wait and say, you know what, we're going to delay yours 90 days because you've only been here 2 months and I need a little bit more time. You've got different options. The point is, it needs to come from fairness. And I would say, even if they're a problem child on someone else's team, doesn't mean they won't thrive under yours. But like vice versa, they may be the stellar superstar at their current role and have problems in your firm. And this goes with new hires from other companies versus transfers within your own company. So I like the idea of transparency. I like the idea of talking to employees about this so they know how I'm going to approach it. And
you even said that in there. You put that in there about, again, I had to read it again. I'm like, would I do that? You can actually when you learn about that person through their records, it's not a bad idea. You talked about in the book here to talk to them about it, bring it up, have that one-on-one meeting, and the importance of one-on-ones with that. And it's okay to bring that kind of things up, because that made me think about what you just said about, well, maybe they'll thrive more under me than you, in a way.
But again, I'm not going to sweep it under the rug and look the other way. If this person had a failed annual review, let's assume in a union shop, right? Layoff happens and this person gets bumped into my unit. Okay, fair enough. But let me look at the performance review from last year. And if the person had some significantly low scores in certain areas, my approach is to say, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what happened here. Do you feel like you've learned from it? Do you feel like you can apply what you've learned to this new environment? I want to talk about it. That's just my personality. Other people feel like, don't want to know about it because it's too hard to talk about, or I just want to wait on my own and see how it goes. And that's all fine. There's no right or wrong. But my style is to be more transparent with my people. And I think that's where the trust comes from. Again, quick thought, Dave, when you look at a bell curve in general, there's a 20-70-10 kind of distribution that makes it a bell. 20% of your employees are stellar. 70% are doing well. They quote unquote meet expectations. They're fully successful and they're doing fine. 10% are probably having problems, being disciplined and or structured out of the company. The problem I see is managers spend a disproportionate amount of their time on the bottom 10.
On the bottom.
If they have any extra time, they'll spend it on the top 20% at the front of the bell curve, because those are easy. Those are the ones who are all self-motivated and they only have good news. If you really want to make a difference in your organization and throughout your career, think about moving the middle. It's the 70% where you want to focus on development. If you can move some of those 70% into the top 20%, man, that again, that's turnaround leadership. That means you know how to grow and develop talent. That is going to be the key.
I like that. I never heard that before like that. And it makes sense. It really does. Because when I told you about in the beginning of all these things, of all your books, it's all about simple little things that it gets tied up. But if you did everything and you confronted, and you'd have more time to be able to focus on those other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the final thought, Dave, I'll share with you is this. On Wall Street, publicly traded companies have 10K and 10Q reports, right? The 10Q is the quarterly, and it feeds the 10K, the annual report. I think the same thing needs to happen with employees. You need to spend time on a quarterly basis with your employees, no interruptions. Usually it doesn't take more than 30 minutes, but you could book an hour. But here's the thought. They're responsible for putting the time on your calendar. They're responsible for the agenda. And your job, and you tell them this, is to coach. This is what the purpose of that meeting is. I want to hear about how you're doing towards your goals. I want to hear about your career and professional development. I want to hear however I can help. Now, you should have some questions in your pocket just in case it gets quiet or gets awkward. You want to have certain questions there, which I list in the book. But the point is, get them on that rhythm. Help them codify their achievements. Think about quantifying what they're doing. Again, increase revenue, decrease costs, save time. I want them thinking that way, but having a once a year annual review in and of itself doesn't work. It's just not enough. They want real-time feedback, but they also want their annual scorecard.
Yeah, because you're just telling them one time, and usually everybody knows what you're doing anyway. It's just through my experience with that, and I agree more and more, because as I evolve, I keep saying I think they deserve it, And if they've turned around, done something wrong, hey, that's on them. But if I've done everything I can do to turn that behavior, I say behavior management, change it. If you can't change it, you have to try something. And I think it's only fair.
Yeah. And you're creating the right and certain circumstances for them to motivate themselves. That's the key. Ask your employees one-on-one, are you able to do your very best work every day with peace of mind? That's your question. Are you able to do your very best work every day with peace of mind? Be very interesting to see what feedback you get from that question. But that's a good coaching question, and it moves things along because people start coming up with, well, here's issues, but then the question is, well, how do we solve them? And what role can you take in helping us solve that problem?
It does. And everybody, again, we're going to wrap this up, and I want to thank you so much, Paul, for coming on. It's always great. I mean, I love these books, and
likewise,
the reason I think I get so worked up, I get worked up on these books. And the reason, it's not that I'm going through it anymore right now in my life, but when a first-time manager is going through all this, nobody knows those sleepless nights, those nights of going home and thinking something's crazy, as simple as these little things are, how it can change your life at home. You know, it can ruin your whole weekend. But if you would have somebody that would teach you and show you, give you options, I should say options of how you want to do it. Because again, that's your own style. Like you even put in there, everybody's different. You know, we all have different styles. But on closing for myself, what I've learned on this, everybody, is it's just a must read. You got to pick it up. And we only touched 20 out of the 46 things on here. And Paul, I want to give you this time, you know, just to talk about yourself again and about your books and why you do what you do.
Thanks, Dave. Well, it was funny. It was a year ago. It was 4th of July, 2022, when I decided to launch my own consulting firm. Part of it is I'm the gray resignation, right? After going through the COVID, I wanted to do something and I don't want to wait till I'm retired to do it.
Right.
So I opened a consulting firm and I specialize in management training, just stuff like this, going into companies and working with their teams. And that's my love. I love teaching. The second thing I do is executive coaching. And then I became a certified executive coach in 2021. So I wanted to have that certification behind me. And then I do keynote speeches. And plus I'm a writer. And the writing, I still write for HR Magazine, the military magazines. I've been doing books galore. It's been busy. But that's what I love. So I decided at this point in my life, I'm going to try and focus on those key areas that I enjoy doing the best. And it's been going so well. It's about a year now, and knock on wood. So far, so good.
That is awesome. And I'll tell you, you can use me as an experiment, because you'd be able to say, Dave, that this happened to you. And I'd be like, yeah, I could give you some really good stories, you know, on top of it. But again, Paul, I mean, to take your time out, I know we're on 2 different time zones here. This is the 3rd time I think I've had you on the show. And, you know, I appreciate it so much. I can't, because you can tell I love talking about it. And this is the longest podcast I've ever done. So it's
no kidding. I am honored.
So, but I definitely want to have you back again, because I want to finish this up, you know, and talk about the other half of the book. But everybody, again, you know, the first time manager leading through crisis, and you can reach out to Paul right on LinkedIn. That's how I met Paul, right on LinkedIn. I think you have all your books up there on all your.
Yes, I do. They're right behind my photo on LinkedIn. It's just Paul Falcone 1 is my address on LinkedIn.
Right over there. So thanks, Paul. And I'm going to talk to you right after this. Thank you.
That sounds good. Thanks for everything, Dave. My pleasure.